Hey everybody, Jamin here from Game Show. As you can see, I'm once again not in the studio. I am in sunny Los Angeles, which is a very welcome break from, gosh man, it's been a really rough winter in New York. In any case, I'm here in LA, and you probably saw the news this week that Nintendo has finally reversed its long decision and has decided to start bringing the Nintendo properties, Nintendo IP to the world of mobile with a partnership with Japanese mobile gaming giant DeNA. This event is significant for a wide variety of reasons, and I'm going to talk more, I think, about sort of the cultural implications, not so much the businessy ones. I think a lot of times this happens a lot in games. When people talk about sort of the business of games, they often don't know what they're talking about, and my job is to sort of reveal things as a cultural critic, not necessarily as a business one. Regardless, I'll link to some great helpful stuff in the description if you want to dive a little bit deeper. I think the first thing that is important to remember is that this move, according to Time magazine, leaves Nintendo rethinking its approach to the very industry that it helped define. I think it's really important to remember that we've seen this before, particularly with the relationship of large media companies in relationship to the internet. The internet has affected every single media industry. The music industry had to sort of change their policies up to make room for streaming music. TV executives and movie studios are starting to obviously produce a lot more high quality video. You're seeing that originally with Netflix, but now there's Hulu, there's obviously Amazon, in addition to sort of all the things, Vimeo, there's all these sort of like new content partners that are doing that. The publishing industry as well has been trying to figure out their way as well. So it's important to remember that Nintendo, because of the age of the company, is finally being forced to sort of reckon with this massive global phenomenon that's known as the internet. But again, given Nintendo's history, they've done this time and time again. It's an 126-year-old it's a 126-year-old company. They've done everything from playing cards to electronic toys, then arcade games, and then home console games. Also, love hotels, but that's neither here nor there. In any case, it's important to remember that Nintendo has been very flexible. And when you have the long view of a company that's over 100 years old, remember, it may take them some time to sort of like make moves, for example, but in the lifespan of a 126-year-old company, each year to year isn't necessarily, it might be very important to investors, obviously, but Nintendo tends to take a very, very long view. My point being is that Nintendo has had the ability to move into a variety of different spaces. They just want to do so on their own terms. One of the most interesting things, if you read the timepiece that I'll link to in the description, is that Iwata, it was really, Satoru Iwata has been really understanding in terms of trying to sort of lessen the hardcore versus casual divide, which Nintendo has really been on the forefront of, starting with obviously the Nintendo Wii. One of the things that he said in the timepiece is, and I quote, "On the other hand, my understanding is that on smart devices, the main demand is for very accessible games which smart device users can easily start and easily finish. These are not necessarily the characteristics that people demand from games for dedicated video game systems." He's talking sort of about the specificities of mobile games, but he's really talking about sort of different types of play patterns, right? Recognizing that Nintendo, in terms of the types of games that they make, don't really fit into sort of all different situations. And I think that Nintendo has been very flexible in terms of trying to create things to meet people where they are. Again, I talked about this in past episodes in terms of wanting to have sort of human-centered game design. And I think that's really at the heart of what he's saying. He's saying that, that they're seeing obviously lots of people use mobile devices, and they want to make sure that Nintendo's universe fits inside of them. One last thing, Shigeru Miyamoto, obviously the mind behind Mario and Donkey Kong and all these great Nintendo franchises, has talked a lot, and especially in that New Yorker profile, which again I'll link to in the description, talked about Nintendo's design process, and it's really hardware focused in the sense that Nintendo is one of the few companies that is able to control both the hardware and the software. So they decide the types of games that they decide to make are very much fueled by what kind of properties the hardware exists. So with something like Nintendo Wii, for example, which had a lot of motion, that drove a lot of the design decision, most of the decisions in terms of what types of games would come to bear. So it'll be interesting to see as they are sort of faced with, a set of hardware constraints that are not their own, what types of play experiences Nintendo comes up with to sort of fit into these particular devices. Anyway, obviously huge news. I think it's really exciting. Obviously only time will tell whether or not this is a appropriate payoff for Nintendo, but I'm certainly excited about it, and I'd love to know what you think. Anyway, I will see you all soon. See you next week.